Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're here inside today for our first episode of Farm Fights, where I talk about a rather controversial issue on the hobby farm, and everyone gets annoyed. That's just the way it goes. So today we are going to talk about heating your chicken coop. It is in the depths of winter. It is just after Christmas, and it is blisteringly cold outside. I live where it can get to 40 below and even colder for a great portion of the winter. So it's cold outside. So let's talk about whether or not you should heat your coop, because every fall this topic takes over the online chicken groups. Everyone wants to know if they should heat their coop, and everyone has an opinion. And for the most part, everyone's a little bit wrong. Because the answer to whether or not you should heat your coop is probably no, but maybe yes. So, let's get into it. First of all, we do live where it is blisteringly cold for a lot of the year. So, do we heat our coop? No. I do not need to. So let me explain why I don't need to. Even though it is 40 below and colder for a lot of the year, especially in January and February, we do not have to heat our chicken coop. We never have had to. If you look at some of my very early videos, you might see a heat lamp in the old chicken barn. We didn't use it, and I won't have another one. I didn't know as much then as I know now. So, ignore the fact that there was a heat lamp in our old barn. We don't have one now. In fact, when we moved, I left the heat lamp behind. We will not need it. So, how do we get away without heating our chicken coop when it's 40 below? First of all, it's in the way we house our chickens. So our coop is, for the summer, separate from the horse and the goat. In the winter, there is a hole cut in the back of the barn so the chickens can go into the barn with the horse and the goat. When you have the horse and the goat and all the chickens and the ducks and the turkey in there together, it's not cold in there. That's a lot of body heat in a fairly small area because our barn is not huge. It's basically a glorified stall. So if you were building stalls in a barn for a horse, for a standard size horse, it's about that size. So it's not huge, and it has quite a few bodies in it because we have 6 ducks and we have a turkey and we've got a whole bunch of chickens of different kinds, including silkies. So we do have birds that are a little more delicate, that typically people think you need heat. Hi, Whiskey. Sorry, Whiskey's just walking past. But we do not need to heat because, one, there's a lot of them. Okay? So if you walk into the barn when the horse and the goat and all the birds are in there, it's not cold in there. Their body heat is generating plenty of warmth in that barn. I'm not saying it's above freezing or anything when it's 40 below, but it's certainly comfortable enough for the birds. The second thing is, if you live in a really extreme cold climate, you might want to insulate. If your barn does not have thick enough wood, you might want to add a layer of insulation and then add another layer of wood on top. Mm-hmm. The best view of that is probably in my older videos when I was filming the old chicken coop, because you can see we slatted wood up the sides, and there was fiberglass insulation in there. If you are using any type of insulation, whether it's fiberglass or whether it is a foam board insulation, make sure you cover it. Chickens are terrible creatures, and they will eat your insulation no matter what kind it is. So cover that insulation up with a board or something else that they can't get through, because they're terrible. So you might want to insulate. You also need to ensure adequate ventilation. And our coop has plenty of ventilation. We have the door openings, we have the under the eaves ventilation. Air can move in our coops. Okay, that's really important. You don't want air blowing on the birds because then they'll freeze, but you want air to move above the birds. You want the ammonia buildup and the moisture buildup inside your coop to be able to escape. So make sure you have plenty of ventilation. And our doors are rarely shut. We shut the doors of the barn when it's really cold. So if it's 40 below, those doors are going to be shut at night because it's freaking cold. But if it's not, so if it's just barely below zero, we don't bother shutting the doors. We want the movement of air to keep everything as dry as possible. And if you hear a crash, it's because there's a cat over here. There's a cat over here. All right. There's a cat over there causing problems. Hi, Pippin. Hi, Whiskey. So we just have a problem-causing cat. We're just not going to worry about it. Yeah, you're a bad cat. But we love you anyway. Anyway. So we don't have to insulate because we have a lot of birds and our... Do not go in that box. Pippin. Pippin. That box is full of Christmas wreaths. Pippin. This is about to be bad. Okay. There's now a cat in a box. What can you do? Constant chaos. Okay. If she shifts, that whole box is going to end up on the floor. It's full of Christmas wreaths. Okay. Anyway, so we don't have to insulate because our entire point when we're constructing things and adding animals is we don't want to have to insulate our bird's coop. I mean, not insulate, heat. Of course we want to insulate. We don't want to heat it. So we don't want to have to heat it. So let's talk about the downsides of heating, since I just finished talking about why we don't need to heat, even in our extreme temperatures. One of the biggest downsides of heating is going to be a power outage. So most of the types of heat you're going to use require electricity. And a lot of people live in areas where they might lose power. Okay, that's just a fact of life for a lot of people. If you live in an area that has rolling brownouts, rolling blackouts, or you typically have no power for days on end, you know exactly what it's like to not have power when you're used to it. So, what happens if you heat your coop and it's a lovely temperature and everyone is snug as a bug and then the power goes out? What's your backup? Because think about you sitting in your house. You're nice and warm and you're probably in a t-shirt or maybe you're in a light cardigan and you're just sitting there watching TV and someone picks you up and drops you outside and you weren't able to grab your boots or your coat or your scarf or your hat and now you're freezing. You did not have a chance to get used to the outside temperatures, even if those temperatures would be tolerable if you were able to acclimatize yourself. You're still freezing. It doesn't even have to be below freezing, and you're freezing. So think about that with the chickens. If it's 20 below, which is cold. I mean, it's not as cold as 40 below, but 20 below is still cold. So 20 below outside, and it's freezing cold, and the chickens are warm and snuggly, and you lose power. If you only lose power for an hour, you're probably okay. But what if you lose power for a day? Now, chickens have a natural ability to regulate their body temperature. They keep themselves warm in the winter. They keep themselves cool in the summer to a limit. But if they didn't get a chance to warm themselves, to have the ability to survive in the temperatures that you've got, and you lose power, you are going to have a problem. Because all of a sudden you go from chickens who are not used to 20 below, maybe they're only used to 5 below. Maybe they're only used to barely below freezing, because that's what you're keeping your coop at. And all of a sudden the power goes out, they could die. Okay, they are not used to it. So if you are going to heat your coop, you need a backup plan. Okay, what happens if you can't plug your heat source in? Now what are you going to do? So that's a real danger, and it's happened to people, especially people who live in an area where they lose power a lot. So definitely consider what you're going to do. Do you have a generator? Do you bring them in the house with you? Probably not. Chickens are gross. I love my chickens. They're gross. They're not allowed to hang out in the house. So you have to have some kind of plan. Do something, because they're going to sit out there and freeze. They're not ready. Even if it's a temperature that they can handle, if they didn't get the chance through the fall and early winter to get ready for those temperatures, they're not ready. They'll die. So that's one of the downfalls to heating your coop. The other one is, think about how moist and damp winter is. And if you don't think it's damp because you're looking at the humidity outside and it's only 39%, you're like, that's not damp. Think about if you live in an area where it does not get cold. Winter tends to be the rainy season. Okay, instead of having real winter, they have a rainy season. There's a lot of moisture coming down in the winter. A lot of moisture. How often does it snow? Probably snows more in the winter than it rains in the summer in most areas, especially where we are. We get quite a lot of snow, but our winters are fairly dry. And they're fairly dry because that water is frozen. It's frozen in the ice and in the snow. If you suddenly were to melt all that ice and snow, humidity would be maxed out. It would be ridiculously humid. And that's not good for your birds. One of the biggest problems with backyard flocks is they have a coop that is too humid. Okay? And I'm not even just talking 50% humidity. If your coop is 70, 75, 80% humidity, your birds are going to get a respiratory illness and they could die. And that's not a good thing. You don't want to lose your flock. The other problem in winter is frostbite, which is not primarily a cold problem, it's a moisture problem. So if you get all this moisture building up in your coop because you're heating your coop, therefore you're melting some of that snow and ice, then what is slowly starting to happen is you're building up the moisture levels in your coop because everything is melting. And it's not drying out because it can't dry out because there's so much moisture everywhere. There is snow, there is ice, and all you're doing is slowly adding more and more moisture to your coop. So you could end up with really bad cases of frostbite in relatively mild temperatures. We don't have frostbite problems in our coop, and that's because it's so freaking dry because everything is frozen. Okay, and we do not add a heater, so we don't have a moisture problem. Okay, so those are some of the downsides to heating your coop. Okay, it's also going to cost you an arm and a leg. For a lot of people, cost matters. I know somebody's going to pop in and say, well, I would spend anything on my chickens. That's excellent. I would spend anything on my chickens too. I will go into debt for my chickens. But not everybody has that option. Sometimes you simply cannot afford to put heat in your chicken coop. And that's okay. Okay? It is okay to not be able to afford to heat your chicken coop. There are other ways you can keep your chickens warm. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But what are some of the circumstances under which you would want to heat your chicken coop? Because like I said at the beginning, everyone's a little bit wrong. So the people who say there are no circumstances under which you should heat your chicken coop, there actually are. So let's talk about why you might need to heat your chicken coop. The primary reason you might need to heat your chicken coop is you have young birds that are not technically ready to be out in the cold, but they have to be out in the cold anyway. Most of us are not going to keep 6-week-old, 8-week-old, 12-week-old chicks in the house in perpetuity. Even if you brood your chicks in the house, and we don't. I hatch in the house sometimes, but they go outside to a brooder. But even if you brood your chicks in the house, at some point you don't want those chicks in your living room anymore. They're fully feathered and you want them outside. But if it's December, you can't just take your chicks and put them out in the snow and expect they'll survive. They're not ready. So if you have young birds that you need to keep at least sort of warm, you may need a source of heat in your coop. It's better than losing the birds, okay? It's 100% better than losing the birds. So you might need heat for that. If you have chickens that are rather elderly, you might have to add a little bit of heat because especially if they don't have very many of them. So if you have elderly chickens and they don't have enough younger chickens to help keep them warm, they may need some additional heat. Just a little, but something to take the edge off just so they can get through the winter. Because when they're older, they are more susceptible to all the dangers that come with the cold. Okay? They might not make it. So if you have older chickens, you definitely might need to add a little bit of heat. Okay. You also might end up in a position where, let's say you're going into fall and maybe you lost some of your flock for a variety of reasons. It could have been a fox ate half your chickens or whatever. And you find yourself going into fall and you simply do not have enough chickens for the coop you have. So if you have a gigantic coop and you only have 3 chickens and you don't have any other options right now, not everybody can run out and buy a new chicken coop. But if you have no other options, okay, you may have to throw some kind of heat in there. You may have to get a heat panel and just deal with it. Because if you don't have enough birds for the space they're housed in, they're going to get really, really cold. It is easier to keep a small room warm relative to the bodies that are in it than it is to keep a large room warm. You know that just from being in your own home. It's easier to heat a small bedroom than it is to heat a large great room. So you definitely might need a little bit of heat if you only have a few chickens in a space designed for 40. Okay, you might need a little bit of heat there. So there are some reasons to heat and some reasons definitely not to heat. If you have one of the specific circumstances where you might need to introduce a little bit of heat, you may have to do that. But let's talk about ways you can warm your chickens up in the coop without adding heat. Okay. One of the best ways is plenty of litter, plenty of bedding. Whatever bedding you use, maybe you like straw. I tend not to love straw. It's really heavy and it smells and it absorbs moisture and I hate cleaning it out in the spring. But whatever your bedding is, maybe you use hemp, maybe you use shavings, maybe you use paper, we use shredded paper. Build up as much of that as you can so they can really snuggle down. Make sure your space is appropriate for the number of birds you have. So if you have 10 birds, there should be enough space only for the 10 birds. It shouldn't be a coop for 50 if there's only 10 of them. You also might want to consider, for example, a cat or two. If you need a couple extra bodies in there, add a coop kitten or 2 in the fall, and they'll help keep each other warm. Vodka's walking past. That's Vodka's tail. Vodka's quite a wonderful dog. And so you got a good look at his tail there. But there are some times where you can use what you've got to add extra heat to your coop without adding heat to your coop. So you might want to add extra bedding, you might want to add extra animals. If you can get everyone together for the winter, maybe you have rabbits and you want to add them to your coop so everyone can kind of get together and stay nice and warm. Maybe you want to do the deep litter method. I am going to do a video on the deep litter method, I just keep forgetting. But maybe the deep litter method where instead of cleaning all the compost out of the coop, you just add new bedding on top and it kind of starts to compost and generate just a little bit of heat just to take the edge off. You might want to consider doing that. We tend not to do so much of the deep litter method, though we do clean out the coops and the barns less in the winter, mostly for convenience. And here goes Vodka again. Thank you. Beautiful tail. He's a funny dog. But so there are things you can do to help keep them warm. So for us, we allow them access to the main barn at night and even during the day where the horse and goat are so that everyone can just be together, keep everyone warm, keep everyone safe. So we do that. There are plenty of ways to do that. But if you find yourself in a situation where you have to heat your barn, maybe you've got little ones, maybe you've got elderly chickens, maybe you don't have enough chickens for the space and you don't have any extra animals you can add to the space to help increase the warmth in that coop. If you have to add heat, how should you heat it? Not with a heat lamp. This is where the do not heat your coop usually comes from. Because, let's face it, we're all kind of stupid. Usually, we will hear something but not hear the rest. So, if somebody starts talking about safe ways to heat our coop, we might start just kind of tuning them out completely, and we might just go, oh, let's get a heat lamp. They're cheap, and they are the cheapest off-the-shelf item you can buy. They absolutely are for heating your coop. It is cheaper to buy a heat lamp than it is to buy anything else. Let's face it, they're dirt cheap. You can get a heat lamp at our farm store for like $10. They're cheap. And the other options are not as cheap. So we're all a little bit stupid in that we tend to pick the easiest, cheapest option. But the easiest, cheapest option is not always the safest option. And I know at this point, somebody who's been using heat lamps for 40 years is going to pop in and say that. I've been heating my coop with heat lamps for 40 years and I've never had a problem. I'm glad. I'm really glad that you and your chickens are still safe. However, that doesn't change the fact that heat lamps are one of the leading causes of coop and barn fires in North America. I don't know the stats for other areas, but in North America, the vast majority of coop and barn fires are due to a heat lamp. Even if they're used correctly, even if they are secured correctly, even if you can use an appropriate bulb. Some people use the wrong bulbs and they blow up. So that's on you. But even if you use the right bulbs, and even if it's secured properly, and even if it's placed well away from the chickens, but if you place it too far away from the chickens, it doesn't warm them up. And so there's a lot of problems. But even if you do everything right, you can still lose your coop. And if your coop is next to your barn, you could also lose your barn. If your coop is near your house, you could lose your house. If it spreads to your house and you're close enough to your neighbor, it could spread to your neighbor's house. So heat lamps have caused an enormous amount of damage, both to property and to life. Both chickens and other animals and even humans have died in fires started by heat lamps. So heat lamps are a big no-go. Doesn't matter how you secure them. Chickens fly around. Chickens are dusty. Chickens are basically a walking fire hazard. They are covered in dust and feathers. Okay? They are flammable. So you should not have something that could light them on fire where they live. The only more dangerous thing you could do is use an open fire in your chicken coop, and I hope nobody's dumb enough to do that. So do not use a heat lamp. If you do need to introduce some heat into your chicken coop, there are panel heaters specifically designed for chicken coops. Don't get one not designed for chicken coops. The ones designed for chicken coops are made to withstand chickens knocking into them. They typically have a cord that has either a cover or is too thick for chickens to peck through it. They just tend to be more suited to that application because they're designed for it. So even though you might be able to get a slightly cheaper panel heater, you definitely want to make sure you are using something built for chicken coops. So they make sweeter heaters, they make panel heaters. They're all designed for chicken coops these days. There's a whole bunch of them. I will, in the description, see if I can link to a couple of really good ones that you could use if you need to. Now, I would prefer not to, so I don't add heat to my coop. But if I had to, I would use a sweeter heater or something along that line, just so that I was doing the absolute best for my chickens. I do not want to risk their lives just because I want to cheap out and get a heat lamp. And the other thing about heat lamps when it comes to cost is they're going to cost you a lot in energy bills. Okay? Your electric is going to go up quite a lot because heat lamps are not efficient. They eat a lot of energy. The panel heaters use a lot less energy. Okay? They are much, much safer. They use less energy. So ultimately, they'll cost you less over the lifespan of the panel. Okay, so it's cheaper to buy the heat lamp right up front, but it is cheaper to run the sweeter heater over a length of time. So even though it's cheaper, when you walk into the store to buy that heat lamp, buy the sweeter heater or another panel heater meant for chickens. It doesn't have to be a specific brand. There's plenty of them that have really good reviews that are meant for chicken coops. So those absolutely are a better option than a heat lamp. But even said, I would not heat my chicken coop unless I had no other option. Because in the event of a power outage, I don't want to have a backup plan. So, like I said, we have really delicate breeds. We have silkies, including showgirls, which are the silkies with no feathers on their neck. We have a couple of them. And they are fine. We just had a stretch of 3 days where it was minus 40 with the wind for 3 days in a row, and it sucked. If you have never experienced minus 40, it's not fun. I hope you never have to experience it, because even just stepping out your door when it's 40 below, it's horrific. Pick your scale, Celsius or Fahrenheit, that's where the scales converge. And they are absolutely horrific, those temperatures. When you are 30 below, 40 below, it's horrible. And I still did not require a heater in my coop. My chickens are all adults, though. They're all over 6 months old, so no one's young. No one is old. So our oldest chicken, Dale, passed away this year, so we don't even have a really old chicken. They're in with plenty of other animals, including a horse and a goat who throw off a lot of body heat. And when in doubt, they can all get together and snuggle. And there aren't a lot of drafts on them. So even though the chicken door, the chicken cutout in the back of the barn, blows right in, and the front door can blow right in, we can close the front door, and they can come away from the chicken door, even though we leave that open. They can come away from that chicken door, and they are not in the wind. So they're out of the wind, there's plenty of other animals, they're in a well-built barn, and it's not overly humid in there. And that's all really important. If you have all of those factors, your birds are probably okay. With a few exceptions, like I mentioned before. You're probably going to be okay. So we have 40 below and we don't have to put a heater in our coop. But we make sure we have a plan beforehand. So if you don't have a plan, make a plan. Now right now, as this is being released, it is January 1st. It's a little late to make a plan for this year, but it's a good idea to make a plan for next year if you do not want to heat your coop. It is absolutely possible to have birds in extreme weather, like we are pretty dang extreme. 40 below is extreme, and not heat your coop. You can have really cold temperatures, not heat your coop, and still have happy, healthy birds. Our birds even go outside, except when it's really, really cold plus wind. So if it's 40 below and it's windy at the same time, they don't go outside. They stay inside. But outside of that, even the ducks do go outside a lot. Ducks are outside more than the chickens, to be honest. They're hardy. But outside of those few days when it's super, super cold, the birds go outside. They go outside, they wander around, even if it's just for a few minutes. Okay, they have a drink. We don't put water in our coop because we don't want to increase the humidity inside the coop. So there's no water inside the barn. Everyone has to go outside to have a drink. And we replace that water multiple times a day. So nobody has to try and peck through ice. We just replace the water. And we don't put the water in the coop. Don't put the water in the coop. Keep the water outside, keep the humidity low, keep lots of bedding so they can get warm and snuggled down, and make sure you have enough animals that they can cuddle together. And then also make sure they can get outside every day if they want to, because it's good for their health. Just like it's good for our health. We should go outside every day too. So should they. Anyway, that is about it for us here today. I am sure pretty much everyone is a little bit annoyed because should you heat your coop? No, but maybe. That's just the way it is. A lot of things do not have a black and white answer on the hobby farm. But that's about it for us here today. We'll see you tomorrow. Here's tequila.